Good morning.
Mayor, if I could just say
Good morning.
that something, at least from where I'm sitting, the screen or the box that Commissioner Yasasi is in is blinking, and it's interchanging with Commissioner Lanier. Am I the only one?
I've got that with
You
other
guys see-
people as well, Joe.
Yeah, but now here's Commissioner Lanier by herself. There's something very strange going on.
You're getting two for one, Commissioner. I'm gonna log out and log back in.
Okay.
Serious? I've never heard of such a thing.
Serious. Yeah, I know. Something strange is going on. Okay. All right.
All right. We'll give Commissioner Isasi a moment to log back in, and then we'll get started, commissioners.
All right.
It's good to see you all virtually.
Likewise.
There she is.
She is solid.
You look solid.
All right, for the record, I was here first, right, Joel? No, I'm just kidding.
All right, commissioners, I'll go ahead and call the Committee of the Whole to order. It's good to see everyone. We have just a couple action items, commissioners, and then we have a pretty full day of updates and briefings. So we'll have two this morning. After our action items, we'll take a break, and then we'll come back together at 2 o'clock for our, let's see, what are we calling this? Mid-year performance management update. And yes, so we have 3 topics this afternoon and 2 this morning that we'll cover. So a pretty busy day. We have a couple guests that have joined us, and they'll be with us after we get through our action items. So with that, we'll start with the first action item. This is a resolution approving an on-premise tasting room license for Harmony Brewing Company, LLC, at 401 Stocking Avenue Northwest. Can I get a motion?
Support.
All right, moved and supported. I think we're all familiar with this business here in town. So any questions or comments?
Yeah, just to they're giving up their Class C licenses and moving it to tasting at both their locations.
Great. Thanks, City Clerk. All right, seeing no questions, Joel, will you call the vote?
Commissioner Lanier?
Aye.
Commissioner Jones?
Yes.
Commissioner O'Connor?
Yes.
Commissioner Moody?
Yes.
Commissioner Isasi?
Yes.
Commissioner Ruppert?
Yes.
Mayor Bliss?
Yes, it carries. All right, that will take us to our next item, and that's a resolution approving an on-premise tasting room license for Harmony Brewing Company, LLC, and this is for their location located at 1551 Lake Drive Southeast. Can I get a motion?
Support.
All right, moved and supported. Commissioners, this is very similar to the one we just approved. Any questions or comments? All right, seeing none, City Clerk, will you call the vote?
Commissioner Jones? Sorry, I didn't hear you, Commissioner.
Yes.
Okay, Commissioner O'Connor?
Yes.
Commissioner Moody?
Yes.
Commissioner Isasi?
Yes.
Commissioner Ruppert?
Yes.
Commissioner Lanier?
Aye.
Mayor Bliss?
Yes, it carries. Thank you, commissioners. All right, that will quickly take us to our 2 briefings this morning. So commissioners, we have two briefings. This morning, we're gonna get a review of an economic outlook and recovery update. So we have a couple guests with us today. I'll turn to our city manager momentarily to introduce them. And then, Commissioner Jones, did you have your hand up?
Yes, Mayor. Now Tim Mraz is blinking and is interchanging with Commissioner Lanier.
Huh.
Okay, so maybe
Yeah.
I need
Same
to log
issue,
out.
Commissioner Jones. It's like multiple people and it keeps swapping between them.
Yeah.
Okay. And I don't see that on my screen.
Only John and it seems like only John and I see it. So we have something special going on, and that we're the only ones who can see this. So
I was gonna say, I don't see it either.
yeah.
I can log off and see if that helps. If not, maybe Commissioner Jones and O'Connor, maybe you guys could log off too.
Or just figure it out. Oh, one of these days, we're going to look back on this and be so grateful that we're not dealing with virtual meetings anymore. So commissioners, I'll keep going and tee up both of these briefings before I turn it over to our city manager. And then our second update this morning is an overview of our fiscal year 2021 citywide strategic plan and the progress that we've made. So this is related to the plan that all of us worked on together with city staff and adopted. So it'll be great to get an update on the progress as well as the current focus of, the next 6 months, what we're focusing on related to our strategic plan. So with that, I will turn it over to our city manager to introduce our guests and tee up the very first update. City manager?
Mayor, I'll give Commissioner Lanier just a few more seconds before starting, if that's okay.
Yes, I'm totally fine with that.
Okay.
There she is.
Okay.
All right, welcome back. Go ahead, city manager, take it away.
All right, thank you, Mayor, and good morning, commissioners. Thank you for your time this morning. We intentionally kept the morning agenda very light. Just for the record, we got through both of those items in 5 minutes because we wanted to continue our conversation that we were having in sprints about performance management and mid-year updates. So recall that for the public at the last city commission meeting during the morning meeting at Cal, our CFO provided a very thorough financial update and giving us an overview of our fiscal fitness within our organization. And today, we want to continue the conversation as the mayor indicated this morning, and we're going to broaden the lens a little bit so you can see at least from some of our partners that work in economic development and economic forecasting, some of their perspectives on the outlook years that you heard from our CFO last week. And then after that, we'll continue the conversation around some of the other areas of performance in the organization. And this afternoon, as the mayor said, we'll go real deep into 3 focus areas and that relate to some of the priorities that you highlighted in our retreat last year, last fall. So with that, real pleased to have earlier, as you saw, came on earlier with us, both Tim Miraz from The Right Place, as well as Jim Roby from the Upjohn Institute. And they're going to provide a perspective of what's happening around both the world and nation, and a little bit of Grand Rapids. And then also you'll hear from our Economic Development Director, Mr. Jeremiah Gracia, who will then follow up the presentation. Then we'll pause there and take questions, and then we'll move into the next section, performance management. So I will turn it over to Jim and Tim.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Manager Washington. And good morning, commissioners. Good morning, Mayor. Thank you for the invite to come in and speak with you guys this morning. Do we have the slides up? I see kind of like, so is it the next slide? Okay, so this morning we're going to start with Jim Roby, our colleague down at the Upjohn Institute, to provide sort of a high level economic conditions on Grand Rapids in the West Michigan area. This is snippets from the same presentation that we did back in December for our own Economic Outlook event that we do for West Michigan. So with that, Jim, are you with us this morning?
I am, and thank you for inviting me.
The floor is yours, my friend.
Thanks so much. Hopefully you all can hear and see me well. My apologies for the technology issues between switching from work and home. And thanks to Tim, we are pleased to be partners with, even though we're based in Kalamazoo, with West Michigan folks such as the city of Grand Rapids and all of you in leadership, as well as the Right Place, very strong partners of ours. We did, we were able to update these slides as of the most recent data from late last week. So, and next slide, please. And I apologize in advance. I'm a fast-talking used car salesman academic, so please feel free to interrupt me anywhere in here. As you know, we just came out of one of the longest longest business cycles. The previous recession was 18 months and 128 months of recovery. This last recession, while NBER, the organization that calls recessions, hasn't called us out of it, this last recession probably lasted 3 or 4 months. It was, as we know, not based in anything outside of the US, based in consumer confidence or anything else. It was administrative and regulatory decisions to shut parts of the economy down. And we know that they continue to be partially shut down. And so we're still waiting for the recession to be recalled. And so we don't know how long the recovery will be. When we did the forecast a year ago for the Right Place, we really thought that the next recession was 24 to 36 months out. And little did we know that it was 3 or 4 months out. Next slide, please. In looking at this, we have not fully recovered. The red line is kind of the recovery. We did fall off the cliff in sort of parts of Q1 and then well into Q2, but then very quickly recovered, keeping in mind that people had, at least some people, and there is some question whether the recovery curve is W's or are they K's, which is for some people, it's a really good recovery. And for other people, particularly women and minorities in industries, particularly in the personal services like accommodation, food service, it's been very difficult for those groups. That we do see people coming back because if you have a contract with Gerber in Newaygo or GM in Toledo, that you better be filling those contracts. And we know that the West Michigan labor market right now is very, very tight in getting people back to work, particularly in the goods producing sector. Next slide, please. When we look at the non-farm employment index at the national level, we saw a significant recovery from the Great Recession, fell off a cliff, but really at the national level, we're still looking at pretty good recovery. Again, with many people prevented from going to work, coupled with fear of going to work, and also with barriers to entry with childcare and others. If we were able to eliminate all of those situations, we probably would see a much stronger recovery closer to levels that we saw pre-COVID. Next slide, please. So what are we seeing in the Grand Rapids economy? We really saw in the most recent period, and unfortunately the way the data come, this was December of 2020, but your unemployment rate is at 4.2%. 15 months earlier, it was probably at 3.6 or 3.7, but I don't think anybody in the second quarter would have thought that the MSA's unemployment rate was 4.2%. So you really are probably at full employment. And as we've talked with some of the staffing agencies, we know that wages are going up simply due to demand and lack of supply of workers. Increased demand, lack of supply. Next slide, please. When we look at how jobs were displaced, Grand Rapids did much better. The region did much better than both the US and the state. While you were doing well, your fall off wasn't quite as much as Michigan, a little bit more than the US, but your recovery has far exceeded both Michigan and well above that of the US. So you really are in a good position, but this is very similar to what we see kind of looking back from the Great Recession, that you all were a shining point, particularly in manufacturing. Next slide, please. When we look at job postings, next slide, we are also, part of us is Southwest, oh gosh, almost really misspoke there, Michigan Works Southwest. We look at job postings, and the thing that's important to remember when you look at job postings in the MSA are that these are job postings, not total job openings. So if you're looking for a CFO, you might have one opening. If you're looking for STNAs, CNAs, nurses, or manufacturing workers, you may have many openings. So the number of true jobs in demand may well exceed the job postings. But really, through the entire period, the blue line, the dark blue line, is sort of a 12-month moving average. So it's smoothed out But certainly in the third and fourth quarter, demand for jobs was at a very high level, at least by postings, and also really sort of outside of the very tight times of 2019, very consistent with demand, at least based in postings in Grand Rapids over time. Next slide, please. When we look at Kent County and the adjacent counties, next slide, please. We see total population change that some of the more rural places are losing. The city itself is somewhat neutral with some growth, and then the surrounding suburbs are increasing, and exurbs are really changing significantly between 2010 and 2020. Next slide, please. When looking at actual percentage growth and keeping in mind that both Kent and Ottawa are actually starting from a very big base, you've seen 10% growth at least estimated between 2010 and 2020. So, you continue to grow and to kind of exceed expectations compared to other places. And so Kent County continues to do well. Some of the rate limiting factors, of course, are housing and price of housing and those sorts of things that all of West Michigan is experiencing. Next slide, please. In looking at, here we use Claritas data. This is one that's regularly used by site selectors, and we were asked to compare kind of the composition because diversity is increasingly important, or maybe has always been important. Don't let me misstate that, but is maybe recognized as increasingly important in the growth of the economy and attraction and retention of businesses. And so what we've seen is a slight decline in the white population, and within what would generally be called minority populations, moving over those 10 years from 15.7% to almost 18%. And within that, some slight composition changes as we've seen growth in the Hispanic and in the Asian communities. And one of the questions that came out of our discussions last week are there additional data and forecast? And we're in the middle of kind of redoing our Claritas contract. And as soon as that's the case, we can share more information on this with leadership in the commission if they're interested. Next slide, please. So we use next slide, please. We use a REMI model, which is Regional Economic Models Incorporated. We've done some work with you and with the right place in estimating economic impacts. It's also a fairly good forecasting model. You'll see at the bottom, and any Spartans fans, I apologize. REMI uses data from the University of Michigan, as well as the Congressional Budget Office, to do what's called a national baseline forecast. And then based on a whole series of things like cost, industry mix, and other things, they do forecasts. The model then generates forecasts for regions. What you'll see here is our forecast for growth in the Grand Rapids MSA. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. What you see is if you look at the gray line, that was the pre-COVID forecast. And then you'll see a series of forecasts about 2 months or 3 months apart as the situation evolved, as University of Michigan changed their forecast, as CBO changed their forecast. And so the two that I guess I'd like to focus on is the pre-COVID in the November. RSQE just recently, literally at 4 o'clock last Friday, issued their new forecast for actually fairly strong growth. So my guess is when these numbers are revised sometime in the next 60 to 90 days, we'll see even stronger recovery. And I know the city manager asked me about how this was going to work on a timing basis. These are annualized, and so we're not necessarily knowing early versus late. But really what you've seen is if you look at the blue line, which was May, the Grand Rapids economy would have never recovered by 2035. And no, I don't believe a 2035 forecast either, but it does show sort of the thought on trend. But the dotted line, which may be called salmon, is really showing by 2022. So really in the next 15 to 24 months, really a recovery for employment in the Grand Rapids area. I think we're seeing that now with tight labor markets. Next slide, please. When we look at goods producing and keeping in mind that goods producing are both construction and manufacturing, we see that really sometime this year we'll probably pop above, at least in our forecast, kind of a pre-COVID as we recover. And as we've heard that many people, even if they're not working due to benefits, have money in their pocket and they're trying to spend it. We know that auto Auto dealerships are at all-time lows in inventory because people have been buying things because in some cases that's keeping them entertained. And so really what we see is, you know, in this area, what we saw kind of pre-COVID, which is a pretty good recovery above actually the baseline forecast. That's usually done by cost, industry mix, and other things. Next slide, please. When we look at private sector employment, we see a little bit slower growth there, but keeping in mind that much of this private sector service employment is comprised of business services, which remain strong, but also personal services like accommodations, food service, entertainment, and others, which are necessarily diminished because of administrative decisions. And so that'll be a little bit slower rebound, but still really looking at 2023, so less than 24 months out, we're predicting, at least at this point, and my guess is with the revised numbers, we may see this in a stronger position going forward, but actually a fairly good recovery. I think much more surprising than a year ago. Oh, please go ahead. So what are we monitoring these days? In the macro area, we're uncertain, and keeping in mind that I come from a nonpartisan organization, so anything I say that sounds political is certainly unintentional, but we don't know what the impact of a change in presidential administration will be. We don't know about the impact of additional relief packages. We know that they create both good and bads. One is they help support people, but they also maybe prevent people from going back to work. As I mentioned, we don't know the shape of the recovery curve, whether it's a W, a series of Ws. Is it a K-shaped curve, which is differentially affecting different parts of the population? Will there be an impact of additional waves? We know that there are additional strains out there. It's unknown how the vaccine affects those. We do believe that reshoring is real. I've talked with site consultants in the Eurozone, and they have people that want to come to the US. The problem is you can't get there from here under current conditions. So people can't come and look at dirt and buildings. And then part of the issue, I think, excuse me, is the dilemma of the number of available buildings, and Tim can speak to this better than I can, but the vacancy rate is relatively low in West Michigan, and many of those are functionally obsolete. And so the ability to grow the economy is somewhat diminished by not only flex industrial commercial space, but also some housing issues too. And we know that's a problem that you're addressing. And the other thing that we don't know, and we're working with a number of manufacturing extension partnerships across the country, is to understand how technology will affect employment. If in fact you have a contract with GM and you're somewhere in their supply chain, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and you can't get workers, at some point, or workers get so expensive, you'll substitute capital for labor, meaning you'll put machines in place. And we're wondering how that is, and we're actually about to go into the field in a survey in Illinois on that very topic. Next slide, please. The things that may be focusing on the Grand Rapids area, again, will people go back to work? And one of the most notable things is the issue of childcare. I know we experienced not in my direct family, but with my kids, is what do they do with their kids if they're not in school? Uncertainty about unemployment benefits when you continue to subsidize it. Will people go back to work, or does it make just fiscal sense to stay home? Again, I mentioned both the industrial flex commercial and real estate market, population change. Will people want to live in cities? We know that there's a lot of places that we're seeing some decentralization, deconcentration of places. So we're uncertain. But then the other issue of that is in many rural places, broadband access, and we know this is true in the inner city in many places too, that broadband access is not sufficient for work from home, school from home, and that actually affects then important residential decisions. Just on a side note, we did a project in Pennsylvania where people were losing life scientists because their kids couldn't game and stream Netflix because while businesses had good broadband, residences didn't. And then really the final thing is, how are the small and medium-sized enterprises faring? And that's in manufacturing, it's in professional services, it's in personal services. Can they survive this kind of bullwhip thing? And that's what there was just an article in the Wall Street Journal in the last couple of days about within manufacturing, the fact that people thought that they were going to preserve capital and other things moving forward. And in fact, the economy came really roaring back in the third and definitely in the fourth and first quarter, and how firms are dealing with that. But how have the SMEs fared? And that's something we're concerned about. I think that's my slides.
All right. Well, thank you, Jim. I do want to especially thank you. I know this was a challenge. Again, this is from our economic outlook back in December, where we usually give Jim 60 to 75 minutes to present. And I said, you got about 13. Can you squeeze it in? So he did a very good job this morning. So thank you, Jim. To kind of complement Jim's comments, at a higher macro level, what I wanted to share with you this morning is a little bit of what the Right Place has been doing, both in 2020 and looking into 2021 at a more regional level. And what you can see here is, despite a pandemic, despite shutdowns that we've seen in the state and our region, the Right Place completed actually 14 economic development projects in our region. So businesses are still looking at West Michigan and Grand Rapids and seeing opportunity. Those 14 projects will lead to almost 1,000 new jobs, a little over 950, and $43 million in new payroll coming to this region. One of the things I want to call out here are the talent assists that you see there, almost 1,000 talent assists this last year. You can imagine during a pandemic, there's a lot of choices that people have. To Jim's comment on, if I'm in Chicago, if I'm in Indianapolis, if I'm in a large metro area, there is a new interest in moving to these mid-tier cities like Grand Rapids and the job opportunities that are here. So our partners at Hello West Michigan are doing a tremendous job making sure that when people do poke their head up and look for opportunities to move, that Grand Rapids is on their radar. In terms of hourly wage, this is something that we added to our strategic plan this last round when we announced it for 2020 to 2022. Right now, it's currently sitting at $21.60. Our goal is about $26 per hour, so it is a little low than what we're shooting for. But that's where we are after the first year. And then finally, one of the things that really reflects sort of the pandemic situation that we had is, this last year, we actually doubled the amount of business assists that we normally do. If you look back at 2009, we sat about 2,000, and this last year in 2020, we were at over 4,700 business assists for West Michigan here, for West Michigan businesses. So next slide. In terms of specifically the COVID response of the Right Place, as many of you might know, we partnered with Kent County. Kent County asked us to step up and help with an emergency Wi-Fi hotspot project. Of which we're glad to say that 78 emergency Wi-Fi hotspots that provide free public Wi-Fi are now available throughout our county. If you squint really close, you can see that map off to the right. I tried to give you the best glimpses I could, but each one of those yellow or orangish dots is a point of access for free Wi-Fi for citizens here in the county. In the city of Grand Rapids, we actually had 10 new Wi-Fi hotspots. They look very similar to that black box that you see in that photo there to the right. That is actually one that's in East Grand Rapids, and right downtown East Grand Rapids, but it's a very similar unit that you'll see in all those 78 other ones. We also were asked to administer not one, not two, but 3 small rounds of small business grants here in West Michigan. There were 2 state grants and 1 federal grant. In total for the 10-county region, it totaled a little over $15 million in total grant dollars for small businesses in the region. I'll provide in the following slide sort of a breakdown of what those look like. In terms of PPE, one of the things that the Right Place wanted to make sure was that, as companies are looking for PPE and producing PPE, that those connections are made. And so right now on the Right Place website, we have a PPE directory of local businesses that are actually producing protective equipment for other businesses in our community. So if you want to buy a local, we actually have businesses here that are actually producing eye protection gowns and things like that. So, and then finally, in addition to all of that, we did launch in early March covidwm.org. There were a lot of websites that were launched around COVID. One of the things that we wanted to do was make sure that businesses in the area understood the information coming down that pertains specifically to business. There was a lot of information on personal health, personal safety, things like that, which is just as important. But as a business owner, when you're talking about reopening your facilities and what are the regulations and what is a safe way to restart, we launched covidwm.org for area businesses so that they would have access to best practices in restarting their businesses, restart playbooks, OSHA safety guides, and things like that. So next slide. In terms of the actual small business grants that we administered, I did want to provide a breakdown as best I could. The best way that we can break down these small business grants is actually by zip code, because that's probably the most granular level of information that we have. You can see there from all three grants. The first one was a state grant. Kent County received about a little under $616,000. The second grant was actually a federal grant. It was much, much larger. And then the third grant was back down to the state again. And what I want to do is at least provide a breakout for you folks, for the commission on at least by zip code in Grand Rapids. And I know some zip codes will actually straddle municipalities. So, again, this is as best as we could get to down to the city level and how it broke out. You can see in the first two rounds of grants, over 70% of the available funding went to City of Grand Rapids zip code. So the vast, vast, vast majority did. This latest round of grants, this is actually a concerted decision by our selection committee, by our scoring advisory committee, that they wanted to open up to a larger area to businesses throughout the county. So that's why you saw that percentage drop there. Was we tried to make funding available to more businesses. If you weren't located in the urban core, if you were, for example, in a Byron Center or a Rockford area or a Cedar Springs area, that you had just as much access as those folks in downtown Grand Rapids. Next slide. So there have been several questions on minority, women, and veteran-owned access to these small business grants. Unfortunately, with the state of Michigan, the regulations in the state of Michigan and our state constitution does not allow the determination of use of funds by race, gender, or special class. So unfortunately, with those state applications, we couldn't even ask the question. The MEDC could not even ask the question. So those lists of companies are published. So if you're curious, I could provide the list of those 100 or so companies that did receive those grants, but I was not able to break it out. But this federal grant, I was. So what you can see here in the gray are the total applications by minority, women, and veteran-owned, and the ultimate grant awardees in each category as well. The reason that you do see those NAs there is because in many cases, you may have a woman-owned business that is also a minority, and so you tend to start double counting things, and so that's why those percentages aren't there. But overall, there were over 1,000 applications that came through, so about a third of all the applications that came through in this federal grant were minority, women, and veteran-owned. And then in terms of minority ownership, you can see the minority mix, down at the bottom. Again, the gray is the applicants, the blue is the actual award winners. So for example, of the Black and African American owned businesses that identified themselves as a Black or African American owned business, about 300 of them actually applied, and about 150 of them actually received a grant award. So about 54% of those that applied actually received a grant award. Next slide. So where do we go from here? In 2021 and ahead, one of the things that's big on our radar, and Jim mentioned it, is the idea of inclusive economic growth. One of the things that is a challenge for the right place as we move forward is that as we continue to recover as a region, as the state continues to recover, as a global state in the economy, we want to make sure that everybody has equitable access to that prosperity, not like we've had in the past. And so one of the things that we did was we reported out in January over a year-long work, and I think a couple of Grand Rapids commissioners were actually part of this work, was our work with the Brookings Institute on the Inclusive Learning Lab. Much of that was reported out in January, so beginning in February this month, a lot of that work is actually going to start being executed upon, and you will see that work over the next 2 years. One of the more immediate things is the right place. We are currently working on a larger region-wide minority business directory. One of the great things that we got about these, we got with these small business grants, was we immediately received over 500 minority, women, and veteran-owned businesses and all of their business information. So one of the things we'd like to do is promote that, promote that information online. And so later this spring, we'll be launching an online business directory for minority-owned businesses that will probably be, in my estimation, at least about 500 to 550 minority businesses here throughout the 13-county West Michigan area. Another area that we're looking at, and Jim mentioned this, is around broadband. Obviously, this is a huge issue in terms of not just immediate with school children and remote learning, but also moving forward. We can't expect businesses to locate in West Michigan if they don't have quality access to broadband. You can't operate a business, these days. And so we're partnering with the county, we're partnering with the region and the state on several initiatives to help increase, access to broadband. I will admit most of these are on the suburban rural end of things, but there's also opportunities for urban infill as well. And then, the third one there, actually emphasizing business development again. It's one of the things we need to get back to the sport of economic development and business, business expansion and business attraction. And, as I mentioned last year, there were 14 companies that decided yes on Grand Rapids and yes on West Michigan. We want to do that again this year, and we want to raise that bar even higher. So we don't want to lose it. We don't want to lose sight, of the ball and the goal on that one. And then getting back to our strategic plan. Finally, one of the things I want to mention is, again, I mentioned it earlier, is talent is going to be, continues to be a huge opportunity for us, especially being Grand Rapids in a growing, mid-tier city. We want to partner with our friends at Hello West Michigan, and also, leveraging our internal talent resources with Cindy Brown, and making sure that, if you are in Tulsa, if you are in New Orleans, if you are in Indianapolis, and you're looking for a new opportunity, that Grand Rapids gets on your radar. And that you're seeing it, on social media, and you're seeing it in your inbox, and you actually are aware of all the great things that are going on in our region. Next slide. Finally, I would be remiss if I did not mention, after 33, 34 years in the saddle, we said goodbye to Birgit Close, our former president and CEO, and we will be saying hello to our new president and CEO, Mr. Randy Phelan, coming from Denver. I actually had a meeting with him this morning, and he was in our office. So he's actually in Grand Rapids right now. He drove across just yesterday, and he starts officially on March 1st, next Monday. So next slide. I think that's it. That's it for us. So Jeremiah, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Tim. So commissioners, I'd like to take some opportunity now to bring some of those themes and provides perspective at the local level in terms of how we are seeing the economy grow and rebound in this time. Next slide. So I kind of want to ground us first and make sure that we give you a lens of how we're looking at all of our tactics and our strategies moving forward. And so you recognize all of these specific areas from our equitable economic development and mobility strategic plan that we have remained focused on, but have pivoted when necessary related to pandemic related items. But I want to talk today and make sure that we understand that we are still staying grounded, specifically in all these areas. And today we'll talk a little bit about the first three, which is the business development, real estate development, and neighborhood business districts. So next slide. So as you heard earlier, the most important fundamental that you can do from an economic development agency is have a solid business retention and expansion program. The reason you want to have a strong one is because when you do those well, the attraction will follow. And so this chart that is in front of you here gives some perspectives of how that works. And so I want to give you this perspective because we've taken a lot of time because of pandemic related items, but also will continue to do these business retention visits because we have to make sure we understand what the companies are going through, what they need, where they're being successful, and help them expand so that when projects that we work on with the right place ask us, well, who's expanding and what kind of investments and how are they experiencing workforce and et cetera, we can have a strong business attraction story. So next slide. So I'll give you a couple overview of the tactics we're using so far. So as you all know, we launched the Small Business and Micro Enterprise CDBG grant, and to date, 105 grants have been approved, and that equates to $525,000, and those are in process of validation and distribution. Now, in order to reach those 105, we did contract and provided financial support to 4 local organizations, being the West Michigan Hispanic Chamber, Grand Rapids Area Black Businesses, Local First, and West Michigan Asian American Association. Now, the importance of that was we knew that they had resources and target companies that they could help us to make sure that we reached those folks that perhaps were not able to access other funds, but also make sure that we coordinated with our regional partners, some of which those folks from those organizations were part of the review process for other grant opportunities, so that we made sure we made proper referrals and made sure that we deployed the money as much as possible and that folks could leverage as many of those grant opportunities as possible. So the second piece that I want to mention here goes back to that previous slide of this implementation of that focused BRNE program. So we're continuing to do joint visits with the Right Place and the Michigan Economic Development Council, or Corporation, I'm sorry, because that is vital for understanding our business needs and connecting them to resources. what we know is that the companies, sometimes they're really good at running their business and producing their widgets and goods, but they're not really sure about what all the resources are available and that they need to be, and we need to be asking good questions for them to make sure that we make them aware of all those resources and they don't miss any of that. And a lot of that is not even the resources, but just make the proper introductions for business development purposes, which have been a great successes. Now, we've also done a business retention program, leveraging that retail retention specialist contract to make sure that the retail and restaurants are also being visited on a regular basis and be connected to those resources as necessary. Next slide. So what have been the key takeaways for us? So as you saw in Jim's slide, there is a positive outlook for 2021 on from our employers. In fact, some have continued to add employees over the last 10 months, but have noted for sure the tight labor market conditions. They understand that they've had to make some changes, such as raising hourly rates or providing creative benefits to make sure that they could retain employees and attract current employees based on growth. So what we've also uncovered is that leases have in fact been renewed, and some have chosen to lease additional square footage based on growth over the last 12 months. Furthermore, some of those have taken the next opportunity because of low interest rates to actually purchase their existing real estate, which again increases our business retention and expansion opportunities because those folks that own their facility are more likely to stay here long term and invest in many other things, philanthropic and otherwise. And we are helping making sure that those opportunities aren't missed, and more importantly, we understand what their growth's in, and we can connect them to workforce and talent needs and or business development efforts, which we already have done over the last few weeks, where we've learned a little bit about a company, go visit another, and they said, well, we really believe our target customer is X. And we said, well, we just met with that company 2 weeks ago. We'd like you to introduce to them. And now they're visiting with each other and talking about business partnerships. So what other thing we must make sure that we understand is that some office users are in fact planning for a return to office as vaccinations roll out. They've understood that work from home could be a part of their workforce, but not necessarily 100%. And they're starting to think about and see how they can safely return to the office, which is good for us as we look at our recovery from the income tax perspective. Now, why is this important? These economic-based employers are critical for the discretionary income to support our retail, restaurant, and hospitality industries, which we know have been drastically impacted by the pandemic. Next slide. So what's next? So we know that real estate development and equitable real estate development, more importantly, as it relates to our equitable economic development plan, needs to have these components of community engagement, land use and environmental impact, housing, economic opportunity for all, and transportation accessibility for all. Again, all principles of our equitable economic development and mobility strategic plan. So this is the lens that we are looking as we look at projects, and they are coming through the pipeline, that are applying for support and not providing support, but just support in the sense of making sure that they're investing in the right place and have interest in investing in Grand Rapids, in perhaps some of those areas that have not been as invested as others, but nonetheless are continuing to make the investments because they know that the community is at the right place for them, and they know that their business development efforts require it because they're outgrowing their space. So I want to highlight a couple, next slide. So I want to highlight a couple projects that we've used this very principle that I mentioned of the equitable real estate development. So in the Boston Square Together project, all of you, this is a very great example of a neighborhood real estate and business development project that encompassed community engagement, land use and environmental impact, housing, economic opportunities, and transportation accessibility. So we mean what we say. We're walking through those processes. We're making sure that those engagements happen and that we include opportunities for all as much as possible. Next slide. And last but not least, we've also another neighborhood real estate and business development project, again, is at 1601 Madison. Again, following those 5 principles under the equitable real estate development principles that I highlighted a few slides ago. And we also know that this is a catalyst project for that particular neighborhood that it's located in, because this is only 3 acres of a 10-acre site, and we know that future development will come. As I mentioned earlier, that business retention and expansion. So now that we have secured a tenant for that project, we're now moving into a business retention and expansion work with them to make sure that company is successful there, so that the next company that says, I'm interested in the remaining development area of that site, understands what successes and what challenges they may overcome, so we can close those gaps and making sure that we reduce time, risk, and money in their projects. So that concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions with Jim and Tim.
Great, thank you, all three of you. You know, despite the challenging times that we still remain in, it's nice to get this positive outlook and to hear some good news about economic recovery. So I'll turn to my colleagues to see if they have questions, or City Manager, did you want to weigh in?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll wait till after some of the other commissioners comment. I do have a couple of things I'd like to point out.
Okay, great. I'll start with Commissioner Jones.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to our presenters, Mr. Roby and Mr. Mraz and Mr. Grassi. I've got a couple, if I could just make a request for a couple of things. For Mr. Roby, I would be very appreciative if you could if you could provide for us on slide 9, you provide the current unemployment rate. If you would be kind enough to be able to provide us with the info in which you could disaggregate it a little bit further and give us the unemployment rate based on race and zip code, I'd appreciate that if you could, Mr. Roby. That's again for slide number 9, which speaks to the current unemployment rate that we're looking at for the GRMSA. And also wondering on slide number 14, which speaks to the population difference, the total change, is there a correlation with regards to the decrease in the city of Muskegon and the city of Ionia and the other areas that saw decreases, and the increases in the areas that have seen increases? In other words, is there, you know, for those, is there the thought that potentially those who are no longer living in those areas which saw a decrease, that they've moved to areas that have seen an increase, is a question I have. And I can very much appreciate the concern on slide number 25. You make mention, Mr. Roby, of the concern or the issue of people going back to work and the real fear of illness and child care. And I'm just wondering if we're seeing any real conversation taking place, and maybe Mayor, you can speak to this, or City Manager Washington, in terms of you know, being able to address the need for increased access to child care because of perhaps that being a barrier for folks being able to go back to work. And also wanted to recognize Mr. Mraz. You kudos to the right place in terms of the average hourly wage is $21.60, and hearing that the goal is $26, which I think is critically important. Thank you for also disaggregating the data regarding the small business grants based on zip code. That was extremely helpful. And also want to speak very openly about my very strong support for the idea of inclusive economic growth, and it being something that is at the top of the list, I think, as it should be for our city as well, not just the area that the right place covers, but I think it speaks volumes to be able to be intentional and unapologetic about wanting to see more folks having a bite at the apple and being able to access economic prosperity here in our community. So kudos to the work that the right place has done thus far with inclusive economic growth. As has been mentioned, both Commissioner Sassi and I were involved in that work, and it was based on our day jobs, and we just happened to be the beneficiary also having the dual role and also obviously serving as commissioners and having access to that information. So thank you to Mr. Mraz and the right place for that work that was done to create the inclusive learning lab. And lastly, just welcome to Mr. Thalen. I'm guessing that perhaps in the near future, Mayor, will have him perhaps here and given an opportunity to introduce himself to those who don't know him. But just want to welcome Mr. Thalen and once again say thank you to the years of service of Birgit. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. Good questions. Excellent points. And I agree. I think we're all eager to welcome Mr. Thalen. I know I have a meeting with him scheduled coming up. So why don't I turn and see if Jeremiah or Tim or Jim, anyone want to answer some of the questions that Commissioner Jones posed?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the questions, Commissioner. Unfortunately, the kind of micro data are not generally available for unemployment for a year or two. So that generally comes from the American Community Survey, and they just released the 2019 data in December. So we're a bit away from really seeing how that works and what the effect of COVID is. But as the data become available, I'm glad to provide it to you and the rest of leadership. On the moving, we use Infutor data, but the most recent data probably are 2018. But we can look and see what those shifts are from people from one place to another. But we have seen certainly in West Michigan, pretty regular movements of people from sort of one commuting shed to another. That's pretty common in most of the movements. But we'll look at it for you and see, at least from the most current data we have, what that looks like.
I may just touch a little bit on the childcare assistance. You know, there are some state discussions around, and I recently was passed along some resources that perhaps even the West Michigan SBDC was sharing on some workshops that they're looking to address this that very issue, Commissioner Jones.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Gracia. It is a significant issue, and there's a number of organizations who have been actively working with the state, not just for funding, and support for child care providers, but really to make sure that there's access to good quality child care for anyone who needs to go back to work. So we'll make sure that we stay abreast of that. All right, any Commissioner Isasi, go ahead.
Thank you for the presentation. Tim, can you share, I know the Brookings work, you have the hourly wage, which is good information. Will you be adding in the future any information about the dimensions of job quality that we're talking about in this session? Because I think that is a pretty full picture about what that, sort of the quality of life that people experience and what that recovery will be like, especially as we talk about a K-shaped recovery. So I'm curious about that, if that was something that gets reported in the future. I think it will help to solidify the aspect of job quality, whether it's the hours that you need to work, what really the hourly wage is based upon the hours that you're working, access to benefits, access to career pathways is another dynamic of job quality. So I'm curious about that. I have a few other, so that's my one question for Tim on Mr. Gracia's presentation. Appreciate the comments too. I will add, I know worked with West Michigan Works and some other organizations last week to try to, I know there's applications for the tri-share model. There should be a suburban, a rural, and a urban demonstration groups that get selected by the state. So I know we had one here in our urban area and talked to at least one employer who had signed up on terms of the LOI. Those were due yesterday. So it'll be good to see where that works in terms of childcare. I know in our my day job, sort of housing is always the top barrier that people are having, but transportation and childcare typically vie to be number 2. And so I did want to hear a little bit more on the transportation side, Jeremiah. Some of those things that we're doing, we have received some of those updates. I talked to a recent business, really a local staffing firm. They believe that about 100 people a month aren't able to get connected into employment because of a transportation barrier. So I think I want to keep elevating that. I mean, we have a lot of things to talk about, but that housing and transportation together, people who sign up, we have some options in our community, but some of them have become a little bit out of employers' reach, and things like Wheels to Work. So I want to talk about, I'd like to hear your thoughts about that. I also would think it would be good too if we can get into some of that data that we have from 311 when we get a presentation like this. I know, thank you to the 311 leaders, I know we can get that, but to be able to talk about it in this open arena, and when we talk about economic development, what are some of those calls that we're looking at? We had that kind of at the beginning of COVID, whether it was concerns about water, concerns about, things that were going into 211. So it would be, I think that would be a nice add-on to presentations like this. So we can talk about that sort of at that micro level, that individual level, as it relates to the recovery and how people are experiencing our city. And then my last question, Mr. Gracia, is around, thanks for the review of the partners that you worked with for the grants going directly to businesses. I think in a few meetings ago, I asked the last time that you came before us with this update was what were some of the challenges that some of the businesses noted or were experiencing, and how might we have put that into our process? I know you already shared some of those, but I did want to lift that up again because I think that government, to me, that's the governmental excellence that the city and your department is exhibiting when we look at, hey, we put a product out there, we're putting products out there very fast right now, but what is the feedback that we're getting from those who might be utilizing the systems or applying for the grants, especially those who maybe didn't qualify, if there were some reasons around that. I know we've talked about that in the past. And then lastly, city manager, how might those sorts of things that we see tie into any policy pieces that we would advocate for at the state or federal level? So those are my questions. Thank you.
All right.
So Jeremiah, I only had one question in there, so I'll let you, if you want, I can take my one and
go for it. Go for it.
Okay.
Go for it.
Sounds good. Thank you, Commissioner SCC. Yeah, and yes, that Brookings work is starting to be operationalized at the right place. I can commit to a couple of things right now, but a lot of this, like I said, was just actually launched in January, so we're actually starting to operationalize it right now. I want to leave with one very important thing, though. Our new president and CEO, Randy Thalen, has made it extremely crystal clear that this is a specific focus area for him. He is encouraged and very excited that we were able to participate in the Brookings Learning Lab. That same Brookings project actually was done in Denver, which was a community that he's coming from, and so he's familiar with that work. It's a particular focus area for him, and so this will not be going away anytime soon, so I can assure you of that. Whether it becomes part of our core metrics of the organization, I can't commit to that, at this point. It'll certainly be something that we continue to track. As you recall from the work, there were two definitions we were working from. The first one was what we called a promising job, which is something that is different than what is perceived as and maybe mislabeled as a good job. The good job is the one that we're talking about, which is one that is $26 an hour or more, has full benefits, provides livable wages, things like that. But it's also important to realize that there's a category in there of what we call promising jobs, which is you may not have the skills as an individual to qualify for that good job, but there's a pathway for you. So if you choose to take that job at $16, $17, $18 an hour, that there is a pathway to get you to that good job at that employer, and that they have the internal growth mechanisms for you, so that you can continue to invest in yourself and your career, and turn a job into a career, and not just have that job and be hired at $16 an hour and stay at $16 an hour. So that's kind of our approach to it right now. We will continue to track it. One of the important things to note there is in terms of how we work and how we track wages, we track them based on what's reported to the MEDC when we do a project for economic incentives and things like that. Right now, all they do track is hourly wage. They also include benefits in their calculations as well, so we do know benefits, but that is an opportunity for improvement, I will say, going forward with our work in the MEDC and policy work going forward, is to start taking a better, closer track and analysis of what is that hourly wage? What specifically are the benefits, that are attached to that job? And then long term, how long those employees stay, how long is the retention, for that company? So I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's great to hear. I'm great to see it get operationalized, and especially as we have things that come before us from, in our economic development project team. So when we look at those wages, and we can keep using that language around the quality job and remember those aspects to give like a total compensation to people who are looking to work with the city of Grand Rapids. So thank you, Tim.
Okay. So Jeremiah, now it's off to you.
Thank you. Commissioner Zassi, so first, the 301 call data, we can definitely request that information from Becky Jo and her team to get that back. And we'll try to get that perhaps maybe even on the March 9th EDPT if you want, just a high level. Transportation, you're absolutely correct. Transportation is a major barrier for many folks to get to and from. We know there has been some impacts to our strategy related to those other three that I mentioned in our equitable economic development and mobility strategic plan. I can say Mr. Nurimar and I are planning to meet in the next couple of weeks just to get level set on where we are in all of those particular measurables and those particular pieces he has on the mobility side to make sure that we understand what changes need to be made or what programming needs to change based on the current conditions that we are in today. We know there's a lot of those factors that have been beyond our control based on public transportation route changes and the like, but we're definitely, again, a meeting is already scheduled to talk about, get a level set on where we are on those mobility issues.
Mr. Rossi, if I could
Yes.
also add, the commission is going to hear an update on mobility here in the next section, in which we'll talk about some of the things we're doing in the neighborhood to focus around ride share and car share pilots specifically in those areas to provide access to cars, as well as some of the other work around public transit, bus shelters, and some of the other updates on transit-oriented development. So those are all local things that we
Yep.
have been working
Yes.
with.
Thank you for that, City Manager. You're absolutely right.
One point of order. I'm sorry, City Manager, you were a little muffled. I did get the sense, but just wanted to say that I had a little hard time hearing you.
I said you will hear a briefing in the second segment. And for those of you, perhaps it might help to put your mic on mute. Can you hear me now? Okay. Yeah, the commission will get a briefing in the next presentation on mobility updates. And we'll be talking about our car share pilot programs that we have planned for some of the neighborhoods of focus, as well as some of the bus shelter updates and areas that we know that need more shelter around the public transit system, as well as our plans around transit-oriented development.
Thank you.
Yes, and the last one was related to small business challenges. For this particular grant, where we saw a lot of folks, they were not located within the general target area, so they applied and they just were not in the parameters. The second piece was they did not have a storefront, so that was the second one. And then there were some that, they did have some, I would say, records and financial reporting information that we all have heard before. We did provide an extra 2 weeks for those folks to try to, and our contractors to follow up with some of those folks that we had asked for additional information. And, there was a significant amount of folks, and we left that open through another couple of weeks. And unfortunately, not all of them responded.
And Commissioner, we'll continue to work on, I want to maybe follow up a little bit afterwards in terms of people don't qualify either because of eligibility for business reasons, or people are not qualifying because of federal guidelines, because of immigration standards. Either one of those, we'll continue to advocate on the national level, obviously around more inclusion. But I think what we've done locally, whenever we've, and both within our city programs as well as with the right place, when we've had the rounds, we've learned our way forward, and we've looked at people who didn't make strong applications in earlier rounds, and we went back when we had second rounds of resources and tried to provide either technical assistance to them or do better education around the application. And perhaps Jeremiah or Tim can speak more to that. I think we've gone back to previous applicants who were disqualified as we've gotten more resources.
Yeah, and that spoke to the coordination efforts that I mentioned in my presentation to make sure that they could understand what information was very similar, if not exactly the same, that they needed for individual applications. And we were trying to be very intentional to not burden them any more than the information they would have collected for other grant applications.
And then lastly, of course, we participated in the New Lucha effort locally for those who would not qualify in any federal assistance because of our immigration status.
Thank you. Commissioners, any final questions or thoughts before we move on to our review and update on progress made related to our strategic plan?
Yes, Madam Mayor, may I?
Go ahead, Commissioner Moody.
On the economic outlook recovery in the slide 25, I just want to ask a question to get clarification on 2 points. One, the potential issue impacting the Grand Rapids area. There's a bullet point that says industrial, flex, and commercial residential real estate. I want to get some clarity on that. And the other, want to get some clarity on migration and population change.
Certainly. Thank you for the question, Commissioner. On the flex industrial commercial space, and Tim can probably speak to this better than me, but in looking at CoStar, which is the national kind of database for these sorts of things, we know that West Michigan, Grand Rapids, all of Michigan, much of the country is always short on ready capital stock. So those 100,000 square foot, 30-foot clears, 2 dock doors, drive-through, ready to go kind of space are always lacking. And what we see in very tight markets, again, not just in Grand Rapids, so I don't want to take this anyway personally, the issue is that most of the available space doesn't often meet those criteria. The ceilings are too low or other things. In some cases, without modifications, which are quite expensive, they're functionally obsolete. And so that's a rate limiting factor to growth. And Tim, you can probably speak to that better than me.
Yeah, and you're exactly right, Jim. I mean, one of the things that we have said now for I would say at least 5 years running is the market for industrial space in West Michigan as a whole, to say it is extremely tight is still an understatement. But one of the things we have to all be real about is, we do have buildings that are available, south of Grand Rapids along 131 in some of these, industrial corridors. The problem is, when we're trying to attract a business or a business looking to expand, they have, essentially they have to oversimplify, they have 2 options. They can move into a 100 to 200 square foot building in that area that was built post World War II, that has significant brownfield issues, that is probably landlocked, that may not be exactly suitable, and they can work through that process and then be in the urban core. Or they can move to Alpine Township, City of Walker, Caledonia Township, Gaines Township, and have 12 to 18 acres of beautiful flat greenfield development and just build whatever they want and build it suit to their needs. That is the reality of business growth these days. And so one is a lot easier play than the other. Now, you do run into additional issues once you get out into the suburbs. You have to get talent out there, which a lot of companies don't take into account when they make those decisions. And then you also have some infrastructure issues where you may want to go out to 84th Street, but guess what? The gas line doesn't go out that far, or the water and sewer don't go out that far. So there are challenges in both scenarios, but I will say it is an uphill battle when you start talking about urban infill. But we push it. We collaborate with Jeremiah and his team on that one. But that speaks to some of the challenges we have here, within the urban 6 cities.
And Commissioner, if you'd like, I can speak to the population migration issue. And the reality is that particularly in the northern states, we tend not to see significant growth in places. In sort of self-developed population. A lot of folks are having lots of kids and other things. And so growing that economy with local folks is difficult. And then, the trend for a lot of migration is to other places, more southern and warm and those sorts of things. And so those create challenges for all of West Michigan. We did some work with Kevin Stotts in Talent 2025. And, you know, when my predecessor and good friend George Erichek was here, he was really looking at a lot of the gap needed to be made up by in-migration. And in this case, I'm not talking about migration necessarily internationally, but it's a combination of domestic and international infill. And that's probably not as big of an issue now as it was maybe 10 or 15 years ago. But, you know, the ability, and Tim talked about the work that they're doing about attracting talent to West Michigan. You know, they do an excellent job, but it's a very challenging type of a thing. So if you want to grow your economy, you need more workers. And so whether you're, you know, growing them sort of inside or attracting them, both remain challenges.
Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you. And Tim, thank you for highlighting the challenges we have with being competitive and attracting people to an urban core versus a greenfield. So appreciate your work on that, as well as our economic development department. All right, Commissioner Lanier, did you have your hand up? Go ahead.
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks to the panel of presenters this morning. I have a few questions, and I will try and do them by slide to make it easy to follow. The slide 20, I'm just trying to make sure that I understood this correctly. At the bottom of that slide and subsequent slides, there are months that are listed, and I want to make sure those months are for 2021. So if I'm looking at the graph, then I'm using March, for example, of 2021 and looking at that chart. And as it progressed, am I starting with March in 2021? Jim, I guess that's a question for you to make sure I'm understanding those charts accurately.
Commissioner, I'm working on my laptop, so let me find that slide and I will be glad to respond to you.
No problem. I'll keep asking my questions as you're doing your search. Thank you. And
Jim,
then
the answer is, I think they're the 2020 projections. So I think those were as the pandemic started pre-COVID, March of 2020 on to November 2020, how the recovery projections include.
okay, so we're not looking at recovery starting after this point. We're looking at recovery starting back last year, though we haven't started recovering.
No, I think Jim should probably weigh in that we're looking at recovery moving out in the out years, but the projections change as of March 2020 versus May 2020 versus August 2020 versus November 2020.
Okay, so 2020. Thank you.
City Manager, may I just make one comment? I think it's important to think about this as an evolving process. So, you know, our numbers are annualized. So if you compare 2021 to 2022, that you're moving in that direction. So I think, you know, there's a growth curve. Now, our data points, again, are annual, but I think, you know, that connecting those annual dots means that you're ramping up. And so, you know, you are recovering. It's just how you're recovering relative to the COVID situation.
Thank you. Thank you. And then slide 27, there were a couple of numbers on this slide regarding new and retained jobs and new and retained payroll. And I was just wondering if we could have that data split between what's new and what's retained for both of those categories. And then I'm also wondering if there have been any assessments or cost analysis associated with doing citywide or possibly countywide Wi-Fi. I know that that's a strong need for so many different sectors. Education needs it, libraries need it, the city needs it, businesses need it. So I'm just curious if there's a more global approach to addressing Wi-Fi. And I think we spoke a little bit to, for slide 30, some of the denials. What's the reasoning for some of the denials with those grants? And on slide 37, as we were talking about decisions that employers are making, I know that in previous presentations, we've talked about that there are a number of employers who are making the decision to continue remote working long-term. But this is suggesting something other than that. So when we say some offices, some office users, like what's the percentage of that that we think are renewing and continuing to do business as usual versus those who are making the commitment to have their workforce working from home? And I think that concludes my few questions.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner. Mayor, may I, I'll just try to wrap up in the essence of time, and then Tim and Jeremiah, you bring in if you think there's something else that needs to be added. But I think we could definitely, Tim, if that's okay, we can try to break out the differences between whether the new and the retained opportunities. This is Tim nodding, that's okay. And the Right Place has been an excellent partner in helping us to coordinate this regional approach to working with the county through the CARES funding around Wi-Fi in public places. In addition to what the county has done, I think we simply report that we're piloting our Wi-Fi in 10 parks throughout the city. And we can share those areas again, and there's experimentation. I'll ask City Manager Matthews to talk a little bit more about that later on when he speaks about connected and engaged portion of our strategic plan. And the comment you pointed out on slide 37 is very interesting, because this is a challenge, and this is really how it brings intersection to the briefing that we had a couple of weeks ago. What we saw from Upjohn and the fact that unemployment right now 4.4%, almost pre-pandemic level, and this is probably the first time in a recession where you have almost full employment recovery. You have the housing foreclosure rate is not like it was in 2008. And so if you just look at those indicators, things would be like, things are relatively well. But the problem in the pandemic is the employment indicator, at least for us, since we're an income tax city, is not a full indication of our economic trend. So the point being that until people, particularly those that are returning back in the offices, are able to be in Grand Rapids and paying that full income tax, we are still going to be projecting out in some years, a loss of income. And the other indication is, even though the housing foreclosure rate is lower and the unemployment rate is not high, until we have people fully reactivated in leisure activities, where we have venues that are fully open and entertainment, and we're able to spend money in hotels and restaurants and other recreational activities, we're still feeling the effect of the pandemic. So I think those positive economic signs certainly around unemployment rate and the lack of the housing foreclosures are good. I think, with being the income tax city, that's the reason why you saw some of the more conservative projections from our CFO a couple of weeks ago.
I was just going to say, Manager Washington, just to follow up on that briefly, is obviously the two topics you talked about, returning to work and broadband, we could talk for the next 45 minutes about. But the one thing I would encourage, and we've already started to partner with the city on this, is Kent County has actually seeded an official broadband task force subcommittee, at the county to talk a little more about long-term broadband expansion. This Wi-Fi hotspot project was fun. It provided a lot of value. It is not a long-term solution. So I think I'm part of that team. I think it's a team of 10, 12, 14 people, different providers around the region. Comcast is part of it. Spectrum's part of it. And the challenge we've been tasked with is, if the county were to take a more active participation role in the expansion of broadband, what would that look like? And so that has just started this year in 2021. So we're looking forward to it. So that's part of it. But again, we can talk more about that. And I encourage you, if you have questions, reach out to me. I'd be happy to talk to you more about that. The other one regarding back to work, one of the couple of resources that we are following right now are both with the Commercial Alliance of Realtors in West Michigan, as well as JLL and Colliers. Between those three organizations, you can get a really good feel for what current office occupancy looks like, who's coming back to work, who's not. I mean, they do this on a daily basis, and so we rely on their data a lot for this. So I haven't checked it in the last couple of months. It obviously wasn't pretty during the shutdown, but we are hearing anecdotally employers starting to call their employees back to work.
And if I just may follow for a moment on Tim, a couple things is that in some cases, there are administrative and regulatory reasons people are not back in the office. For instance, I'm only allowed to be in the office for needed meetings like this. And then there is some thought out there, and I can't share any articles because I don't have much, but anecdotally that in the long run, there's likely some mix of both work from home and in the office, maybe a few days a week in both. But there is some concern that over time, productivity will decline in offices where people don't interact as people rather than through Zoom and others. And we spent some time with some folks at Steelcase, in fact, last summer, talking about that issue of after 2 years, there's some productivity declines in the professional services sector and others. So I think in the long run, and this is a speculation, that we'll see people returning.
Great, thank you. All right, commissioners, any final questions or comments? Okay, thank you. Again, thank you, both Tim and Jim. Thank you both for joining us today and for all the information. We'll look forward to continued updates. I know that economic recovery is front of mind for all of us as we not just move through this pandemic, but come out of this pandemic. So thank you both. Thank you, Mr. Gracio, for all of your work moving forward, our vision for equitable economic development, and really a lot of the initiatives that we're taking on here at the city. So thank you for that. All right, we'll go ahead and close that briefing. Thank you. And we'll move to our next one. And this is an overview of the progress we have made related to our strategic plan. So I will turn to our city manager and ask him to give us an opening on this before he turns it over to his team. So city manager.
Thank you, Mayor. Can you hear me better now? I think I figured out what was happening. Thank you. I apologize for that earlier. Again, my appreciation to the team that briefed us earlier, but we'll continue the discussion. If we can go ahead and pull up the slides quickly, we'll ask our Sustainability and Performance Management Officer, Ms. Allison Waskey-Sutter, to provide us an overview of our strategic plan and progress, and then we'll hear additional briefings from Assistant City Manager Doug Matthews and Deputy City Manager Eric DeLong, and I will conclude the comments this morning in wrapping up the presentation. Yes, sir. Right. There.
Thank you, City Manager Washington, and good morning. I'm going to jump right into it. And so just a reminder that, of course, as city staff, we work to lead with our values in all of our work. So our 6 values: accountability, collaboration, customer service, equity, innovation, and sustainability. And our staff's working every day to elevate the quality of life through excellent city services of our mission, and ultimately to achieve that long-term goal stated in our vision that our city will be nationally recognized as an equitable, welcoming, innovative, and collaborative city with a robust economy, safe and healthy community, and the opportunity for a high quality of life for all. And so just wanted to highlight some past information of which today's update builds upon. So our first annual performance report for the first year under our strategic plan, we presented at the end of September and is available online, was a very in-depth and detailed presentation. We then followed up toward the end of October and had our prioritization workshop with all of you to help look at priorities for not only fiscal year 21, but also looking into fiscal year 22. And then as City Manager said at the opening of today, of course, our CFO Claren gave the financial performance and forecast update in February. And so another note that there will be a more detailed supplemental report that will be available to you in the near future for those of you that might want to dive a little more into the details. But we really did work to keep the presentation more at a high level and to just help identify some of the accomplishments and commitments that are representative of all of the work happening across the city and all of our departments under our strategic plan. You'll see that we are going to talk about accomplishments for the first half of fiscal year 21, which is July through December of 2020. And the team will also note some of the commitments that have been made that staff are working on for the second half of fiscal year 21, which is January through June. And then just wanted to give a quick reminder with respect to some of the performance measures that you'll see in the report. You'll see the circled charts, and those are helping to measure our performance for all of the qualitative work that city staff's been doing around our strategies under the plan. And we'll also highlight through the team some of the key metric dashboard metrics that have been updated that are through current date or the time that's identified for the metric. And so just a reminder, perhaps for those that are listening in, that of course in our October workshop with all of you, these 6 issues were identified as top priorities for fiscal year 21 to stay focused on. And so with CFO Claren's presentation, you heard fiscal sustainability and discipline this morning. You heard work done around economic recovery and some of that work. And so we'll be focusing on providing updates for the other 4 throughout this morning and this afternoon. And so just as a reminder with respect to the dashboard, it is publicly available. There were 37 metrics out of the 140 that Commission approved and said, okay, 140 is too many, let's bring this down, make this more digestible. And so together we identified 37 that you really wanted to have top of mind to continue to measure and be presented on. And so that's our key metric dashboard. I'm happy to say that in partnership with Ms. Glover, Mr. Teal, and Mr. Bulkins, that we are now at 32 of those metrics which are available. And so 11 have been added. And so now, just to give you a high level, if you look at our performance across the city for what we are tracking for the first half of the year for fiscal year 21, we had 747 activities. So a lot, this is work that's directly aligned to the strategic plan. So this is not necessarily inclusive of all of the work that we're doing, a lot of essential services, very important work done by staff and departments. But across this, you know, what I really want to point out is that 76% of all of the work has either been completed or on track. And so if you look at the measure in yellow and red on the left, yellow identifies where we've had some disruption and red identifies where there has been major disruption. And so together those add up to about a quarter of the work. And I think that that speaks volumes, particularly noting, of course, the challenges with COVID that many departments and city staff have been facing. This next slide, I'm not going to go into any detail, but it's just here. And I wanted to note that this breaks down the information into each of the 6 strategic priorities. So the one on the top left that says priority 1 is governmental excellence. And so if you wanted to have a more detailed snapshot of how are we performing with respect to the commitments that we've made for each of the 6 priorities, this will give you an indication of how we're performing at that priority level. Now I'm going to turn it over to Deputy City Manager DeLong.
Thank you, Ms. Sutter. So what we'll talk about first are what we've been doing in COVID response and recovery. So we've reported several times to you about this over the year, and this is a summary of what we've done in the first half of the year, and then we'll get to what we're planning for the next half. And this work encompasses all the work we're doing in response, in addition to all the work we're doing to implement the strategic plan. So this year, in the first half of the year, we facilitated the opening of the Purple East facility to provide additional shelter and warming facilities. We accumulated over $20 million of relief funding from various sources and have applied it for relief and resiliency purposes. We've made economic resiliency and recovery investments in resident resiliency and business recovery. We'll talk a little bit more about those later. We launched the Bridge event last fall. And we've monitored all the orders coming from the governor and the Department of Health and Human Services and have adjusted our services accordingly to fit the needs of our community and also the needs of our workforce. And we've also collaborated in the creation of social zones that have been very effective. Next. So what we're doing in this next period is we are working well with West Michigan Vaccine Clinic over at DeVos Place. We're working to coordinate vaccination of our own workforce, focusing first on police and fire, and then continuing through the workforce as priorities are established. And then we're working to develop and execute the next round of our ARIS investments, our economic recovery and resiliency investments, which will include some pivot in terms of economic recovery. And we'll continue to monitor state and federal stimulus grants that may be forthcoming. But now I'd like to turn it to Mr. Matthews to highlight essential services.
So as you know, one of the critical components of our response has been maintaining service to our residents throughout this last year. That's required a lot of flexibility and a lot of innovation amongst the staff and cooperation with our employees, with our unions, and in many cases with the community being adaptable as things have changed sometimes on a weekly basis. I want to point out that throughout it all, we've maintained prudent, strong financial management and controls, and maintained our public safety, our police, fire services, our emergency services, as well as expanding our service to the homeless populations. We had a big election over this last year, as well as wrapping up our census, which had very positive results. And maintained our work on critical infrastructure and construction projects throughout. I think it's a credit to everyone who chooses to serve here at the City of Grand Rapids that we've been able to do that successfully over the last year with the changing circumstances that we've been under. So as we look ahead, of course, we've got delivery of the fiscal plan right ahead of us. And we're already looking at the construction season opening back up, continuing lead service line replacement, vital streets investments, parks, not just services, but additional infrastructure and investments through the parks millage. But we're also going to reflect on what we've learned over the last year and find ways that we can continue to innovate and be flexible in the way that we provide city services. One of the big focuses that really kind of dovetails with our recovery and our look towards the future, of course, is the master planning process and the implementation of the police strategic plan. A lot of questions about re-entry and getting back to normal in terms of operations. We're having those conversations now. As conditions improve, we'll start dusting off those re-entry plans, and hopefully this summer we'll have something that looks a little bit more like normal around here. Allison, are you going to do a pitch here, or you just want me to go straight into government excellence?
Just go for it, Mr. Matthews.
Okay, so in each one of our strategic priorities, you'll see that we've got a couple of highlighted metrics. This is just an example of what we're going to bring forward in full, and I believe Allison's going to talk a little bit about it. If we can go to the achievements. So our accomplishments July to December. As I mentioned, we continued a lot of our infrastructure work as well as maintaining our financial position as best we can under the circumstances. That flexibility required a lot of new policy work, some interim and some permanent. Things like teleworking were things that we were contemplating in advance. And I've said often during this response that a lot of the things that we've ended up doing aren't new, but they were certainly accelerated through this process, and that's not necessarily about a bad thing. You could say the same about Grow 1000. We wanted to grow that youth employment program, and COVID gave us a vessel to really put the gas on that. Adapting our city facilities. We talked about increasing security for our employees, and we were able to do that through the pandemic. As we talked about recovery, we talked a lot about equitable recovery, which gave us the opportunity to look back at our policies and our construction guidelines and make those updates. enhancing our internal communication under these unusual circumstances, as well as working more closely with our state and federal partners on relief funding and efforts. So as we look forward, we're going to continue our work towards transparency. We've got some pretty big innovations on the open data side, opening up our full expenditures in our budget to the public for review, implementing additional technology to continue improving our productivity and accessibility to the public. That includes improvements not just to inspection scheduling, but also to our 311 systems. You approved over the last couple of meetings additional training on equity, both for the community, for employees, and for leadership in the organization. And we'll be launching Grow 2.0 here pretty soon, and hope to build on what it is that we learned over the last year.
And then on the in-government excellence, we also have the Third Ward Equity Fund. And I'd like to report briefly on the fiscal 2020 investments and what we're doing in fiscal 2021. So you can see that there were 4 areas of focus in fiscal 2020. The business grant program, which is actually business reuse incentive program, through which we were able to award 16 business grants for $422,000. We also are working on a program called Keeping People in Their Homes that is working to assist persons with significant code enforcement concerns. We've got 10 projects either completed or underway. In lead awareness and education, we collaborated with the Kent County Department of Public Health, and we're able to have a program that created 850,000 separate media impressions. And then we worked with the Family Outreach Center to have them work in their Seeking Safety program to provide special needs for persons in their program. So needs to help them get to work, go to school, do things that would help them seek safety. So in fiscal 21, the proposed and prioritized investments include investments in resident resiliency, and those contracts that you see there are underway or have been awarded at this point. Mr. Garcia talked about the business grant program earlier, and that program, we're in the process of making those payments now, and are considering how to pivot from what we've accomplished here to see if there are additional work that we can do in this area. And then community reactivation. So we have more work to do here, and we'll continue to work as we move forward on both the 2020 investments and the 2021 investments. Moving now to economic prosperity and affordability. On this sheet, you'll see we have one new metric that's been included, and that is on the left-hand side that talks about the number of housing units that were completed during last year. And so you can see that is 686 units that were completed and are in service during last year. Also, you'll see reported to the right current metrics, one that talks about growth in W2, that's the one that is minus 8.30%. And also the next one regarding special events attendance. So both of those are significantly impacted by the pandemic. The income tax return and W2 filing has to do with the delay in filing and also lack of movement in the labor force. I'm not quite done yet. Having to do with attendance, you can see that we had 45,000 persons attend events, when in a normal non-pandemic year, the events that we sponsor would be over 1.2 million attendance. Okay, so let's now focus more on the 686 housing units. You can see that of those in the chart below that, 327 of those were affordable. So pretty good number of affordable units brought on, and we're looking to build on that in coming years. Key accomplishments now for this past 6 months. We have renewed our retail recruitment partnership with DGI and the Chamber of Commerce, and did so at reduced cost. we've revised the local brownfield revolving fund to support first-time developers and to allow us to do more projects in neighborhoods of focus. This is important because we can direct more support in those areas. We, as mentioned earlier, did employ 354 youth through the first phase of Grow 1000. We adopted the Boston Square Together Initial Voluntary Economic Development and Community Partnership Agreement, which is a significant move forward for us in terms of economic development and also neighborhood development with neighbors. And we attracted Paragon North American headquarters to Grand Rapids in partnership with MSU, Right Place, and the MEDC. So key commitments moving forward, we will pay the $525,000 in business grants through our economic recovery and resiliency strategy to those successful businesses. We also will continue key public-private partnerships that include the Market Avenue corridor redevelopment, work with Spectrum and their Center for Transformation and Innovation in the North, and also with River Restoration. We'll launch Grow 1000 2.0 and have a goal this year of employing 650 youth and establishing a long-term youth talent pipeline for our community. And we'll work to establish the affordable, we'll work to establish the Affordable Housing Fund. Now, Mr. Matthews will review engaged and connected community.
Thanks, Eric. So here you'll see a couple of the metrics that we have on engaged in community, including our ability to continue to be responsive to customer inquiries during this response, as well as the number of attendees that we've had in the events that have been led by Parks and Recreation in terms of engagement. One note I want to make on there, and it'll be mentioned a little bit further, is again, kind of accelerating initiatives. We had talked about expanding our digital engagement, and COVID gave us that opportunity. So Parks and Recreation has been on the forefront of that, and we're able to continue to meaningfully engage people as we moved our way through the pandemic to keep their projects on track. So let's go to the next one. We also were able to finalize our welcome plan to foster a welcoming environment for immigrants. That includes not just the plan, but I mean some of the work that we've been doing on our own in terms of making sure that we institutionalize and advance language access as a component of that. So we're hopeful to be able to bring some specific plans around that welcome plan forward here soon. I mentioned the pivot to virtual public engagement. COVID gave us an opportunity to really put the pedal on that and advance it and start iterating in that space, which has been great. Parks has been one of the leaders in that space with 1,500 respondents across 11 projects they've been working on. Mobility has also been active using that new tool. And you all just approved another one here recently that we're going to be rolling out in terms of text-based feedback. It's worth noting the response rate that we had on census in terms of self-response. A lot of that credit goes to the team that was working on that locally and the funding that we were able to contribute. And we revised not just our internal communications, but our external communications throughout that time to better focus our messaging. I had mentioned voter outreach and our success on the elections, as well as pivoting on our neighborhood matching fund to fund COVID-specific activities that help uplift the community. And the last one I want to mention, of course, is the bridge that we did in the fall to fill that space that was left by the pause on Art Prize. And we really learned a lot through that process, and it's informed the way that we have worked with and advised a lot of our event organizers since then. As we move forward, we want to complete the survey we just rolled out with our media partners, as well as conduct our survey of the community to learn more about how they prefer to be communicated with. We're going to continue our work in terms of language access across a variety of platforms, and I mentioned launching a text-based system to be able to collect feedback as well. Engagement will continue to be a priority both across the river and of course across the master plan. Going back and looking at our community survey results in preparing for the next round of community surveys, hard to believe that we're getting close to year 2 in our semi-annual process, which means in the fall, we should be launching another round of surveying to see where we stand. We're going to be moving forward our work on the community engagement framework for the organization. That should be coming out this fall. I mentioned before, and Stacy's talked about previously, piloting with a couple of departments our language access policy.
So in the area of health and environment, we have some new metrics as well. So the one on the left has to do with the number of households within a 10-minute walk of a park. You can see we're near the goal, but I'm going to unpack that in a minute. And same thing for the next one to the right, which is also new, measuring the number of children with elevated blood levels. So looks like a good average. We'll unpack that as well. And then the current one that has been in existence for a while, the number of the amount of our waste stream that we were able to divert from the waste energy plant is actually down a little bit. And that has to do with continued issues with contamination that we're working on with the help of a grant. So here's where we unpack the persons within a 10-minute walk of a park. You can see that a lot of the area of the city is it meets that metric, but it is not met as well in neighborhoods of focus or in the 3rd Ward. And we have work to do there, and we have an acquisition strategy that's beginning to make progress on that we'll talk about in subsequent meetings during the next several months. And then with elevated blood level, you can see, remember the average that we talked about before, what was 3.54%. But you can see that some of our zip codes, 49503, 506, and 507, and 504, exceed that amount. So while overall we're doing well, in those zip codes, we need to do better. And so we need to continue to focus on that. So accomplishments during this period of time. So we were able to rank 33rd on the Clean Energy Scorecard. We have 10 park projects that are currently under construction, and planning continues for projects at MLK Park, Lodge, and the Veterans Park building. We received $5 million in lead service line replacement grant, and we'll be deploying that beginning this construction season. We launched startup operations at our new yardway site at Domtar in compost. It's a composting site. And we also advanced the initiative to install solar, a 1 megawatt solar array at Lake Michigan Filtration Plant. And we're still working through that process with Grand Haven Township. Key commitments coming up. We will bring the biodigester online. And you can see that we'll start with gas production by Q4 of fiscal 21 and gas revenue by Q2 of fiscal 22. We will begin the we'll begin the lead service or the LED streetlight replacement, and we've already replaced 2,000, and we'll have just talked about awarding a contract today for replacement of the remaining 16,000 lights that will be done over the next 2 years. We're going to launch parks and pools openings and build on the work that we've done with outdoor and virtual class innovation over the last year during the pandemic. And we'll have a strong and a good launch for the 2021 park season. And we're going to advance 24 park projects that are in design, including 4 river edge parks. Moving on to mobility, again, we have 2 new metrics, and one to the left is off-street occupancy of our facilities, and the one in the middle is on-street parking facility occupancy. And you can see that both of those are in the red, and those are both driven by the pandemic. The interesting thing is that for off-street occupancy, we actually, in terms of passes sold, are maintaining our current rate. So we have people who are maintaining their subscriptions, but with all the pandemic issues about work and events, they're not coming to work. Then in the over on thank you, on the one on the right, that has to do with the Vital Streets Good and Fair rating. You can see that we're at 60%. That's up from 37% when we started. And we have until 2030 to get to 70%. So we have 9 years left. We're well on our way and moving forward. So here, this again is a measure of occupancy of off-street and on-street parking. And it looks at, you can see the pandemic effect. 2020 was moving along okay for a couple months, and then the bottom fell out in both cases. So key accomplishments in mobility. The city manager talked about what we're doing in terms of bus shelter installation. We've accomplished 22 installations so far. We have more planned for this fiscal year in collaboration with the Rapid. And we took a little pause during this year as the Rapid worked on their routes and got squared away. We're have launched a scooter pilot and had 52 rides, 52,000 rides already, and through 176 parking stations. During the pandemic, in addition to off-street parking and on-street parking being affected, also Dash ridership was affected. You can see that it was half of what it was on a normal period of time. And we also have begun planning for parking enforcement being moved from the police department to mobile GR. Moving forward, our key commitments for this next 6 months of the fiscal year. We're going to manage financial impacts of the pandemic on mobile GR fund. So with the lack of events, event revenue is down significantly, and we're managing through that, and you'll see that during budget review. We'll pilot a neighborhood focus-based transportation pilot, which is a car share, with a focus on the MLK resident neighborhood. We are working then to complete the transition of all parking enforcement from GRPD to mobile GR by July 1. And we also intend to implement traffic calming program changes that will allow us to deploy more alternatives and more of them, and probably in a streamlined and more neighborhood friendly way. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Washington, who will take us through safe community.
Thank you, Mr. Zamong. A couple of, if you could mute your, there you go. A few new metrics under safe community. Let me remind the commission, so we'll go into a deeper dive of some of the topics you'll hear from specifically the police chief and oversight office later this afternoon. But the first two relate to training. And then the last two, the third one is the number of events that the police department has participated, is a new metric. And even during the pandemic, the department found ways to engage both physically as well as virtually in almost 160 events. And the last one is around the number of persons who are experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness that became stably housed, that reached housing stability. And there you see almost 376 people became stably housed who was experiencing homelessness. And if we go to the next slide, I can break that down a little bit looking at this aggregate information. I know it's a little small, but if you'll focus on the top graph to the right, what it essentially says is of the 376, 200 of those persons were African American. And so we can see that the large majority of the people who were receiving services in terms of becoming stable housed were African Americans. And you see the next, some of the other demographics on the bottom regarding by ethnicity and percentage of people that were Latinx. Next slide. And so a few accomplishments. Of course, we continue to learn from our experiences around the civil unrest incident and done several debriefings with other agencies that were involved in that. That has helped to inform our improved emergency operations center guide that's in development, as well as the fire department has been very intentional in working with dispatch to adjust speeds and segment speeds and CAD based on some of the performance and response. Lots of collaboration with the police department, the oversight office, and the city attorney in my office in helping to reform improve some of the policies in the police department. And we've talked about a lot of those previously, but specifically use of force, and those are operational now. So you'll hear later on from the police chief around that and his 3-year strategic plan, as well as some of the resources that were diverted from the police department. Because I think the narrative gets lost. The police department did reduce their budget almost $2 million, and a large majority, or quite a bit of that, went to the oversight office to resource that office with additional staff. And the oversight office has hired a full-time oversight specialist and has continued to do work regarding some of the studies that governance around the number of bodies that we have that inform public safety, as well as some of the past studies that have been done. Next slide. Several other things, the department, in response to the amount of violence last year, partnered with SAFE Task Force and hosting the gun buyback program, taking almost 200 guns off the street, and had additional multiple deployments of Operation Safe Neighborhood, which resulted in increasing enforcement of potentially violent offenders. And I'll talk about the reduction in homicides here shortly, and we've gotten good results year to date as compared to previous years, as well as going through the engagement process of listening to community around the strategic planning efforts of increasing use of technology in the department and the expansion of the HOT team. As you recall, we were able to deploy the HOT team and expand them with additional mental health and behavioral health specialists, and partnering with other organizations, as well as increasing the hours of operation and having other non-uniform personnel, such as a victim assistant advocate, work with families who have experienced violence, as well as the expansion of victim services. Next slide. So this is the stat I alluded to earlier. Last year was one of our highest years of homicides. We had 38, and year to date this year, we only have had one. We're very, very fortunate. Even one is too many. Year to date this year, this time of 2020, we had 7. And so we are already seeing some of the effects of the work that had been started towards the end of the fall. I think it's due to a couple of reasons. One, I think we're getting a lot of collaboration with community partners. Officers are starting to engage even more, and even now, especially with even the administration of vaccination, but also just feeling more empowered to be collaborative with community, as well as knowing that safety is important because of the high amount of gun violence that we had last year. We're also partnering with other area agencies around hazard mitigation, and partnering with both Kent County and Ottawa County and the Emergency Management Office. Allison Ferroni is doing a great job of helping us lead that effort, as well as improving our continuity of operations plan. And we've seen over the past couple of weeks, over the past week, especially from some of our neighboring states down south, how it is important that we continue to plan for emergency operations, hazards mitigation, and making sure that we can continue to perform city services in the event of a both natural or human disaster. You'll hear this afternoon about some of the progress that's been made around the evidence-based RFP program from our oversight office and the police department. And we'll continue to look at ways to improve the staffing and hiring outcomes in all of our public safety departments, but specifically the police department. And so next slide, please. Looking forward, you'll hear, again, I won't go into detail, you'll hear the police chief talk this afternoon about the deployment efforts around the neighborhood policing work and all of the good work that the police department is able to do based on their strategic plan. So I won't go into a lot of detail around that, but I will say that one of the things that the department is focused on is improving communication and engagement, and the chief is making progress along with our corporate PRO office on hiring the new public information officer. Next slide. So that concludes our briefing today. I did want to say, after the fiscal plan briefing last Tuesday, I think it was the very next day, we heard the proposal from the governor's budget, and we are very appreciative, hopeful that the $17 million, excuse me, the $70 million that has been allocated for income tax relief for those communities that are income tax cities will continue to progress to both houses, that we might proceed some of the benefit of that. But we'll continue to work on our budget preparation, and hopefully we'll have several scenarios. We'll plan receiving that allocation, but if not, if we're not able to have confirmation of that receipt, we will be preparing a budget without the inclusion of that. That will factor in some of the tough decisions that we'll have to make, and you'll see the budget engagement process with the town hall and the various workshop that leads to adoption on the 20th. So with that, Mayor, I will turn it back to you and see if there are questions from the commission. I do want to thank the staff for all of the work that has gone into preparing this update, and particularly Ms. Sutter and all the department directors and their staff, and making sure that we're able to be accountable and transparent in terms of our performance.
Thank you, City Manager. I really appreciate all of the information captured in this update. I think all of us knew that city staff have been working hard this past year through the pandemic to move forward our goals, but seeing it captured this way really lays it out in a I think a really powerful story that we have to tell, as well as the priorities that we're continuing to work on over the next 6 months. So thank you for how it's been formatted and shared. I think it's easy to read, but also I just want to add my thanks to all of the city staff and the teams and departments who've been working to get us to where we are today. I know we do have 3 more in-depth updates this afternoon, so I'm going to hold off my questions related to those topics until this afternoon, but I'll turn it over to my colleagues to see if they have specific questions or comments they want to add to this discussion. And I'll start with Commissioner Repart.
Thanks, Mayor and City Manager and staff. And first, let's just acknowledge this beautiful sun that's shining in our windows. I hope that between our long meetings, we all get a chance to take a little quick walk and enjoy it. I just have one question and 6 or 7 affirmations. There's a lot there that's worth celebrating. I'm super excited about the budget transparency that's going to be rolled out this time around, and the language access policy that's going to be coming our way. I also really like the emphasis on health in all policies. I think that that's just a great way to frame how to tackle the intersectionality of all the things that we're dealing with, and lots of other things in there to celebrate. My question is around the housing units. I'm thrilled that we have a goal for each year, both for total number and the number of affordable. And I guess my question is related to how we get at that number. Are those the ones that are approved? Are those the ones that are permitted? Are those the ones that are completed within a calendar year? Just so that I have that information around how we get the number for 686 and then what we're going to accomplish in 2021.
So, Commissioner, I know that those are information coming from our development center. So I'll confirm whether those are those that we've issued occupancy permits for, or how exactly we've determined that. But I think it's housing production, so they're ready to be occupied. Not you'll hear about housing starts a little bit later.
Thank you, Eric. And any questions posed that city staff don't have an answer for right now, we'll just expect them to follow up with an email and provide that additional information. So. Other questions and comments, commissioners? Commissioner Isasi?
Thank you. I just have a few questions. One is on the language access, and this will come through with the policy review and the pilot. I've been thinking about when we have it in the evening and we say that it's available, and I'm curious to know how many people are utilizing it, yes or no, and I don't know if that'll be part of the pilot to determine some of those pieces. So that's one of my questions. I think the other piece around the economic prosperity is a continued review of how our corridor improvement authorities engage and how making sure that we understand not just the differences that maybe where individual CIAs are in terms of their tax capture, but we had a really good meeting the other day with Mr. Gracia and Ms. Solis out of Economic Development with one of our North Quarter board members, just to focus and talk about what is possible as we move through this recovery. Many of those individuals are business owners who volunteer their time on our board, and I think many have been feeling overwhelmed about what they're doing in their own business and how they make sure that they continue to tie that into the CIAs, and what are some of those, not just the best practices, but as we review our budget, what are those specific investments as we talk about those neighborhood business districts. So that's more of a comment. And then I think my other comment is, I just have two other comments. I'll say one for the master plan for this afternoon as a further detail, but I just wanted to share with this group, I will now be the co-chair of the SAFE Task Force, which I wanted to bring up as we talk about safe community. It was a board in the city that I was a part of prior to being a commissioner. And I think to the point of, the conversations that we were having 5 years ago that Commissioner Lanier led about what does community safety mean? What is quality of life? Looking at the impacts of behavioral health or lack of in our community and trauma. So I'm excited to take on that new role, working with a variety of partners, both in our GRPD and also in the community. So I'll be interested in following that along as we go through specifically on our safe community as we go through this budgeting process. So just wanted to share that with the commission.
Manager, did you want me to speak to the language access piece, or do we want to roll everything up at the end?
Yeah, go right ahead.
Okay. So that's one of the things that I've been taking a look at. The adoption rate for commission proceedings in Spanish is very low, especially, when you factor it out, cost per viewer. I can just give you an example. Right now, we have one person watching in Spanish. The last evening meeting, we had 6 views. I don't know how many people were watching live. We believe that part of that has to do with delivery, and it's one of the things that we're looking at is how can we make the proceedings more accessible. Usually if folks are coming to the meeting, they're looking for something specifically. And we want to get to the point where we have indexed streaming in English and Spanish, where folks can go straight to the item that they want to view and view that item. So we're looking at some things that we can do both operationally and through technology to increase the accessibility of that information. But to answer your question, right now, we're not performing where we'd like. And we don't know if that's necessarily because we're not delivering it the way that we should, or if it's just a demand issue. So we're working through that right now.
Thank you, Doug. I think those are absolutely the pieces that I'd like to highlight. And I really appreciated David's jumped right in coming from Austin to Grand Rapids. And I think has some really good perspectives about, what does that look like and how are people engaging? In some ways, it's easier to engage on the commission calls, not having to come down here, but thank you.
All right, commissioners, other questions or comments? Commissioner Jones?
Thank you, Mayor. Just wanted to quickly speak to the fact that it was just really good news to hear that we have continued to suspend the water shutoffs. I think that's obviously critically important, and an effort to do all that we can in the midst of this pandemic with the economic hardships that are being experienced by so many. Also wanted to lift up the continued lead service line replacement. Also, again, critically important that we don't stop in those efforts. The revised MLB policy, I think that it is paying great dividends, and my hope is that we can continue down the path of attracting more. In fact, what came to mind was when Mr. Mraz was giving his presentation, he mentioned that because of the grant process that they facilitated, that they were made aware of a number of new minority-owned businesses in the area. And so perhaps our folks can work with their folks to find out if there's some overlap there, and see if there's an opportunity to bring more into the fold to consider for business opportunities in the city. Also, just want to know, just to get a quick update on how things are looking, or whether or not it's a realistic. It's realistic to believe that we'll be able to have our own land bank. Wondering if there's any substantive updates there around the land bank legislation. I know that it's been kicked around a bit, but and then lastly, also wanting to know what is I guess ultimately the decision making around the sidewalk snow support pilot program in terms of its continuation. What needs to be in place, I guess, or what's the deciding factor in terms of whether or not we continue that or not. So that's it.
Thanks, Commissioner. I'll have City Manager jump in, but I'll just share with you that I've continued to have active conversations with our legislators around a city-specific land bank. We were disappointed that didn't move forward during lame duck last year, but it has been. We have a leader, obviously Representative LeGrand has been leading this in Lansing, and I know it's a priority for him this year. So we'll continue to work on that through our legislative process, but also Ms. Karen Farrick knows that it's a priority. So thanks. City Manager.
Thank you, Mary, and I can support your response in terms of making sure that this is a legislative priority for us, and we continue to advocate for it. On the snow pilot, sidewalk snow removal program, I have not seen the results from this season yet, and so we'll still be reviewing it. We at least have snow to remove this year, and I've heard of some anecdotal reports from it, but not formal. And so Ms. Miramore can give us an update once we have the formal results, and we'll hear a little bit from him this afternoon on the parking enforcement, if he has any early projections on what we're seeing, can share with them as well.
All right, thank you, City Manager. Commissioners, any other questions or comments? All right, seeing none, we'll have ample opportunity this afternoon to continue our conversations. And then Commissioner Isasi, you made me think about our prior conversations related to SAFE. And I just want to remind commissioners, from my notes, I have down, and maybe City Manager can speak to this, that Mr. Brandon Davis has been working on really looking at all of the different committees that we have in place around public safety and violence prevention. And I believe he'll be providing some input to all of us as he does that analysis and finishes up what some of his recommendations will be to make sure that we're really clear and streamlined and aligned with all of our different efforts. So thank you for reminding me of that and for letting us know about the recent decision with SAFE. So City Manager, any final thoughts as we finish up and close this? And then we'll all be back together at 2 p.m. today.
No other thoughts there. Looking forward to seeing everyone this afternoon.
All right. Thank you, everyone. We'll see you soon.